So I was thinking about a couple weeks ago when we were in San Francisco, and Jake, you sort of, I guess, convinced me. I was already predisposed, but you convinced me to take a Waymo for the first time, which is kind of crazy that I have never been in one, but it was so cool. I was amazed.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
It is very, very cool. And I had ridden in a self-driving car a long time ago. I got the chance at Google when they were first working on the project in secret. And I was at this event where they announced it. And I was with my friend Serge, and he signed us up. You could sign up to take a ride. And they both were like talking about like, hey, we're doing this program. And then they were like, surprise, you can go outside. We're in Mountain View. Like you can go outside right now and ride one, but you have to sign up. And Serge was like, buy the sign up sheet when they said that. And he like just wrote his name and my name on it. So we got to ride in it. And I remember how crazy it was. Like this car pulls up, and there was a person in that time, there'd be a person in the driver's seat. But they would just like put their hands back. And so, but it was wild, and it drove this little route. Then for years, we were living in San Francisco. You remember seeing them testing it, right? And there'd be a person in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And it'd have all the LiDAR going, all the spinning things on the top of the car, on the side of the car.
Yeah.
And it was so annoying because it was just like, you'd see them all the time, just going slowly down the road. And it was like,
it was in the buses where like the super visible signs of like big tech overload in San Francisco.
Yes.
Everyone's like, oh God, these stupid cars everywhere.
Yeah. Right. And then the big sort of, I guess they're like luxury buses, even though they smell like a porta potty inside, that like take you down from San Francisco to the South Bay.
Right.
And I mean, really, I shouldn't complain. They were
very nice.
They're very nice, but they do smell like that. But the whole, and like the promise originally of, oh, there's a self-driving car. Wow, this is so cool. And I don't know, that must have been 2008 or something. And then it was just like for years, it was just no, it's just this dumb thing that drives slowly and like slows you down in the city. And then now it's real and it works. And I was really enthusiastic about it. I signed up on the waiting list, and one of our previous trips, I had taken it and I was like, this is great. And I took it a few more times. Yeah. I was curious from your standpoint. I have an answer to this, but from your standpoint, what is it about it that's so cool?
Well, the first thing that struck me was how normal it feels. Like it doesn't actually feel weird. At least it didn't to me.
Right.
And I think it's because the way it drives is very human-like, and obviously trained on human drivers. And it even does little things like when it's at a stop sign, it'll like inch forward a few inches, like closer to the stop sign, which is like logically not a thing that a self-driving car needs to do, right? I mean, maybe it is. I just assume that's sort of like a human quirk where you're kind of like, oh, let me just like get a little bit closer here. But the thing that I found the most, not surprising, but the thing that stood out to me was the first time I took one by myself, because I think gone with maybe like both of you, and then I had ridden with Michelle, and then at some point in the trip, I took one by myself, and that was when it really hit me. I was like, oh my God, I am alone. Like I'm in this little like pod. Like how often are you alone outside of like your home, right? How often are you like alone in public? And I was just like, I am alone. I'm not talking to anybody. There are no noises. It was like a weird kind of, I don't know, almost restful sort of experience amid a busy trip, running all over the city. So that was the thing that stood out to me the most.
I think that it is restful. It is strangely restful. That's a great insight about it. I think for me, the killer feature was simply that since Teslas have become widespread as the car of choice for Uber drivers at least in San Francisco, I get car sick almost every time I take an Uber in San Francisco. If it's with a professional drivers, Uber Black or a professional driver, it's a different deal. I think they are really optimized for, it's going to be a smooth ride, a professional ride. It's great. I would still take a professional driver over a Waymo. But in the case of a typical, like it's UberX, we're trying to optimize for as many rides as possible or whatever it is. And especially in San Francisco with so many four-way stops, it's just stop and go and accelerating. And the way that an electric car has all that punch off the line, man, I just instantly get car sick. And it's going to take me half an hour to recover afterwards.
Right,
I'm just, I mean, like I'm functional, but I'm just like,
yeah,
and
like halfway through the next meeting.
Right. And then the other thing is, I hate to say this, but everybody, all of us, I'm sure I have my smell, and people are like either, turned off by it or not. But when you get into a car with another person, they have their smell and you're smelling the smell. And the nice thing about the Waymo is like, there's no smell. I mean, unless maybe the person before you a little bit, but it's not like somebody's there with, their air freshener or their whatever. Like, it's just pretty neutral. And man, maybe I'm a little hypersensitive here, but between the motion sickness and the smell, I'm just like, the Waymo is great.
A funny ad campaign. No air fresheners.
No air fresheners.
Yeah. It's like, you could have like a billboard with like one of those like tree air fresheners and then like a circle with the line through it. The air freshener free experience.
No, like 1 out of 3 times like a lingering bit of like cigarette smoke smell.
Right.
Like just nothing.
Yeah.
Just, oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was super fun. Should we do a podcast?
Let's go ahead and do a podcast.
All right.
This is Jake and Jay-Z. This is Jake and Jay-Z.
You're listening to Jake and Jay-Z, the weekly podcast about startups, design, marketing strategy, and a bunch of other stuff that we are thinking about and talking about. That's Jake over there. I'm Jay-Z. We are the founders of Character Capital, the authors of Sprint and Make Time. This is our podcast. You can read, listen, learn more at jakeandjz.com. Today, we have an extremely special guest, the most special guest that I could possibly imagine having on this podcast, because it's our co-founder, partner, Eli Blee-Goldman. Eli, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Jay-Z. Pumped to be on today, guys. Thanks for having me.
Eli's been a VC for what, like 15 years now? Something like that?
Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, it's kind of done like just about everything you can do as a VC, like invested in companies before they incorporated, in companies that were like about to go public, like hardware, software. You did some biotech investing back in the day, like investing in like things that needed to be approved by the FDA. Is that right?
Yeah, let's just say it. It definitely was a realization of the difficulty of that, and like not totally wanting to do that anymore.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so we're, for those reasons and many more, we're super lucky to get to work with you. I'm curious if I know the story of how you got into VC, but there's a lot of founders and aspirational future founders listening. Can you share the story of like how you got into VC in the first place? It's one of my favorite like things about you, like about your background.
I want to interrupt for a second just to build the hype for Eli's backstory and share my roller coaster of emotion with the introduction of Eli into my life, because I have been used to working with you, John, for years and years. And I'm like, okay, this is my buddy. This is my work partner. We've written a couple books together. We've been in hundreds of sprints together. This is my guy. And you go on this sailing trip, you move out of San Francisco and you come back, you decide you guys are going to move back to Wisconsin, back to Milwaukee. And then I'm talking on the phone with you and you're like, hey, I met this guy and I think we should start a venture firm together. And I'm like, wait a second. Like you just met this guy? Like, where'd you, I met this guy in Milwaukee. And I'm like, you met a guy in Milwaukee and all of a sudden we're starting a venture firm together? Like, this is crazy. How is this going to work? And I was really like, I was kind of almost hurt. It's like, now you just meet this random guy and he's like, all of a sudden he's on the par with us. He's like part of the team. But then what I learned over time is that Eli is such a high character, no pun intended, such a high character, excellent person that you really can tell when you work with them for the first time.
Yeah. And
also that Eli enabled us with character to do something really special through his full stack of venture capabilities that you and I didn't have. Everything about how the venture firm runs, all of the nuance and the experience you need from having been on boards and seeing companies through IPO, all these things that Eli's happened to do in his career enables us to offer the full suite of what a venture firm needs to offer, and also do the sprints and the deep work with founders and founding teams that we love to do. So anyway, sorry, now we should actually let Eli talk, but that is the for me, like, the introduction, that when I finally heard your backstory, I was like, how did this guy learn so much and get so much done in your 15 years? So now, will you please tell us the story?
Oh man, now the pressure's on. It was such a windy path, I think, that got me into venture. And I think that that's something that feels surprising looking back, because if I were to rewind to when I was in high school, I was born in Lexington, Kentucky, family moved a bit north from there. But I basically had no idea what I wanted to do. And I didn't even want to go to school. And so after I graduated high school, most kids, they're ready to go to college. They have an idea about something they want to study. And I was like, I hate that idea. I'm going to move to Botswana. Hey, mom's like, look at these people I met online. I'm going to go work for them in the wilderness. And it seemed like a great idea as like a teen boy.
What's more surprising, that Jake, that I would meet a guy in Milwaukee and start a venture firm, or that Eli would meet some people online and move to Botswana with them? What do you think?
Yeah, right. I mean, that is a really quick forming a trust bond really quickly based on limited information, which is something you have to do in the world of venture. That's a key thing. And
also, I will say that one of the things that really stands out about you, Eli, is you have incredible intuition. I don't know, maybe we could talk about this more later. I don't know if you have always had really strong and sort of accurate predictive intuition, but it's remarkable. So I'm actually not surprised that you were able to like make that decision as a teenager that you should move to Botswana, and that everything would be okay, and that it would be a formative experience. But
so this was still in the earlier days of like all things internet and social internet in particular. And so I was looking for just how can I get out of the country? I'd had the chance to travel with my parents when I was younger. My mom's a professor, and so we did semester at sea. And it was this really formative experience to me to see all different types of people working on building, just living their lives in the world. And so I knew I wanted to sort of recreate that again.
So semester at sea is like you're on a boat.
You're on a boat. Yeah.
You go from port to port. Where did you go?
Port to port. Yeah. We started in Miami, and then we went to the Bahamas, and then Cuba, and then Brazil, and then South Africa, and then Mauritius, and then through the south of India, and then to Singapore, and then to Japan, and then back to Seattle, I believe. So it was like I was 13 or 14 that sort of like kicked it off.
So
like,
cool.
Wanting to do a bunch of things. But like I had the dumbest idea in high school, which is like, all right, you can learn stuff, but you can't really learn everything unless you do it. And so I was like, teen boy, I was like, oh, I don't want to just go to school and like read books. I want to experience life. Like that's how you really learn things. And it's funny actually, Jay-Z, that you mentioned intuition, because if I have any at all, I think it's only from getting in enough reps on making mistakes, on like poor intuition decisions, like just doing that over and over and being like a terrible learner. And as an example of that, as I was flying over, to go meet this family in Botswana, I realized that because it was the early days of the internet, I had no idea what these people looked like. We had talked on the phone, like on a satellite, their satellite phone or something, but I had no photos of them. And I was like, crap, what am I going to do when I land? Like, how will they know who I am?
What was the website you were using to meet them, or service or whatever?
Yeah. So this is an even greater twist. It was actually for au pairs. So I had, I have a little sister, and I had done some babysitting. And so I was trying to think, like, if you have no skills, who will take you for what reason? And helping out with kids, like, especially like in a rough environment, like that will help. I also had tried to get a cargo ship to take me, but they would have had to become an employee. They were like, So that's how I ended up there. And basically, it didn't work great. I was not as good at being sort of a bushman as I thought. And that's one of those mistakes, right? It's like you try to have an understanding of your base version of the world, and sometimes it doesn't work. And hopefully, there's some part of me when we look at startup founders that like that intuition of like, oh, maybe it's okay to like formally learn. Somehow, maybe that's filtered through. I'm not sure. But I did end up going to a small liberal arts school. And again, I was interested in all sorts of stuff. So I was interested in math. I was interested in art. I was thinking about doing the foreign service, but none of them really aligned to me. None of them clicked. And when I was a rising senior, a partner from a firm that was based in Milwaukee came to speak at my school and started to talk about this thing called venture capital. And this is like, again, the levels of embarrassment just rise and rise. I had actually never heard of venture capital. I mean, I was an econ major, but it was sort of like econ, modern languages, math. These things weren't like translatable in any way to a clear career to me. And what it boiled down to when he was talking was in venture, you find really smart people who want to make a positive change in the world in some way. I don't know of any founder that wanted to do something negative. They all want to make some change. They want to make money. And your job as a venture capitalist is to work with them and help them execute and build the future. And I was like, holy crap, you get to sort of like be in the sci-fi novel and help that become reality. Like, that's amazing. And it just felt like this reality like lock-in. It was like, two paths sort of out there, and then it was like chink, and like I'm ready to go. Like, this is what I want to do. And so I badgered them. I just badgered them.
Paint a scene for us. You're in this lecture hall.
And so
how many people are there?
There's maybe 50 to 60 people in there, and I had brought a resume because I already like knew the idea sounded just amazing. So I brought a resume, and everyone in the hall was like, well, theoretically, if you wanted to get into venture, how would you get into it? Like, what are the things to do? And, so the answers that the presenter were giving was all, well, you would go out, you would meet venture funds, you could go and work for a startup, these things. And I'm like sitting in my seat, like vibrating, like, gonna give him my damn resume, So I did.
Amazing.
And
so talk ends, and then what do you do?
I hustle up there and I'm like, look, this is what like I really want to do. This just fascinates me from every level. Here's my resume. I'm willing to make this happen no matter what. Like, please just let me work with you this summer. I'll work for free. I won't ask for anything, essentially making it as low of risk as possible.
You're a senior in college at this point?
I'm a junior. It was like junior going to be a senior. So it was like
junior going to be a senior. And in your own estimation, no marketable skills, you said. You were Yeah. Okay.
No, yeah. I mean, I truly almost became a foreign service officer because on a whim I took the test and like only missed it by like a point or two. And so I was like, truly that was like alternate path that probably wouldn't have gone to the lecture.
You narrowly missed. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
But you go up there, you've got your resume, and you're like, look, like you have nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose. Yeah. And then they didn't respond to me.
Did they not respond in person? Or they just like...
Well, and finally I sent, a few emails, and I got one back. It was like, that feeling when like a good email comes through and you're like, oh, yeah, it's happened.
Yeah.
I don't even want to open it. I'm so excited.
Right.
And so you get it and read it over. Well, probably we don't need anyone, but check in a few weeks. I'm passing you to my colleague. Okay. Stay cool. Ask your friends, ask your mom, like how can I make this email as good as possible to send that email out? Nothing. So send like 2 to 3 more emails after that. And then finally it's like, internships are about to start. I have to decide. I think I had like a couple of offers from like consulting firms or something. It just sounded terrible, but this was right after the great financial crisis. This was not the time to be choosy. I was ready to work. I was ready to make this happen. So I would have taken those. And so then I thought, I'm just going to start calling them. And like, this is the most annoying thing that you could ever do as like in today's world. Like, it's like literally spam. But I think I left like 1 or 2 messages, and then finally I got a message back, and they're like, "Okay, look, you're right. There's very little downside. Like, come work this summer. Like, when can you start?"
Wow.
Yeah.
So you framed it for them like there's no downside for you.
Yeah, there's no downside. Like, if I'll do anything. I don't care. I'll answer phones. I'll get the coffees. I'll take notes. I truly don't care. And I did end up doing many of those things, by the way. So really put in the grunt work.
Yeah, that's fascinating though, because that willingness to really do anything to be around the space that you want to be in, that's actually kind of rare. I don't think that for most folks, and I wonder, we could probably psychoanalyze you all day and not come up with this, but I wonder what it is about, where you were right then, where you came from and where you were in that moment and what you saw. And I think this comes back to John's observation about your intuition. And part of intuition only matters if you know how to read it and how to act on it. And the fact that you were like, oh my God, this is it. And I'm willing to just totally go kind of bananas on it. I'm willing to offer myself up for, where there's not this clear path. I think it's very hard when you're in the beginning of your career or like pre-career starting something out to sort of say, I'll do the most grunty thing to just be in this space. And I don't really care. And this isn't an interview of me, but like I had experiences like that at the beginning of my career. It turned out to be really helpful. Just like, I'll do anything. Fine. I'll do that. Just so I can be around what's going on and pick stuff up. And I do think it's kind of rare. That's really cool. Okay. So then,
I mean, as you were talking, I was just thinking about something which is, we all have a bunch of interests, right? There's like this big bubble of like interests and things that we're looking in. It's rare that you feel like the conviction punch on any of those interests.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found is I was interested in a zillion things again, but I had basically never had a conviction punch. And so when I got this one conviction punch, I was like, I have to do this. And it's funny because now, I've been doing it for almost 15 years and I still love it. I love every single part of it. But I feel bad because, if you're a founder, you think, well, to be a VC, you need to be a founder first. And I'm always thinking to myself, like, well, if I had founder conviction punch, I would have done it. But because I haven't, like, this is my thing. This is the role that I can play in the venture ecosystem.
In your answer, you gave a fine example of an Eli-ism, an Eli framing, a conviction punch. I've never heard that before. I've never heard you say that before. And you said
That's probably going to be the title of the episode, by the way.
Absolutely. That's going to be that. We should change the name of character to conviction punch. It's great. And this is like almost every time I'm on a call with you and a founder, you say something at some point that I have not heard before. It's crystallized like that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what they needed to know right now. I think that sort of conviction punch, even within how you operate, is kind of powerful. So there's just something different in the way your intuition is tuned. Yeah. Well, that's really cool. It also makes me think that of all of the ways that people get into venture for real, it's a very small percentage of people who are in venture, from my perception, who are actually former founders. It's a lot of folks who have some kind of a finance background or an MBA or something. Maybe it's a mix. But if you come into it with your whole plan all along through school was, I want to get into venture because it's this highly lucrative, potentially thing, or like whatever, you're going to come into that conversation with this small VC with a totally different framework.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a conviction punch. You're not going to be all in to work with them. As a result, you probably come across, like, relative to you, every other person who might have contacted them would have come across as very lukewarm compared to the conviction punch of like, I will do anything to work with you. Like that's so different. That's so different. And it separates you and it ends up giving you this amazing opportunity that how old are you when you start this, like, I'll do anything, I don't know, internship?
I guess I must have been about 21.
21. Okay. That's wild. So now you're in, where are you physically? What's the city?
So I'm in Milwaukee. Took it out of the savings. Like I'd worked at Subway, very, very proudly worked at Subway in high school, and
Yeah.
saved up. And so I think I had, I don't know, put out, $3,000 or $4,000 to get a whole place for the summer. And yeah, got my like old school suit on because this was more of a buttoned up firm. So I had like the suit, the tie.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh man.
Yeah.
We
Are there
had, yeah.
any photographic evidence of that of that era? I would love to see
Oh,
that.
yeah, yeah. That seems so embarrassing, JC. And this is like when we were taking photos for the first time with character and you didn't want to do any joke shots, like to minimize the risk. I feel like these photos have to be buried.
You would, yeah. To be clear, just for my own amusement, not for.
So this is a high risk endeavor for you. You're staking your life savings to that point, your life savings, because you worked for years to save up this amount of money that you're now going to burn in a summer.
Yep.
And you're going for it. You're in Milwaukee.
Yep.
Were you familiar with Milwaukee already? Was that like a city that no. So you brand new city.
No concept of it. Yeah. Yeah.
That I think would be really interesting is if you could share like what does it actually look like to be an investor, to be a VC, and what does that mean for founders? Because I think, if you're a founder, if you're thinking of starting a company, if you're interested in startups and you're listening or watching, you probably have seen like, approximately 1 million tweets or like LinkedIn posts that are all about like VCs. And it's like, it's either like over inflating like the importance or the prestige, or it's like sort of jokingly, poking fun at like Patagonia vests or like whatever. But like, it's really hard to find real account of what a VC does and how specifically do they work with founders in their day to day. So
like asking like for a brief history of everything on VC. Like, just cut it down. As I think about it broadly, every venture fund has a pool of money. We have a finite amount of money that we've ground out and raised when we founded the firm to sort of have the chance to work with startups. And our job as a VC is to figure out the relative weightings of every dollar that goes into companies. And what we're trying to maximize is, given these limited resources, how can we help companies grow using this cash, and hopefully have a few of them that will make a lot of money for the people that we are responsible to give money to. And so one of the interesting things, sort of, if you think at a core level about that process, is that it's not the exact same role as a founder in any way. And I think that the conflation of sort of the founders actions and VC actions is where a lot of the pain in the communication comes from, because the role of a good VC, no matter how amazing they are, is not to run your company. Like that's a different business. And so the role of a founder is to build and run your company, which, by the way, is unbelievably hard. It's ridiculously difficult. You're trying to do something new, to make something new, to build a team, to make sure you have the cash to operate. And that cash to operate, that's really where VC is playing a role. It's also sort of the way you spend your time and actions as a VC. They don't always correlate directly with the output in a company, like if you're a founder in a company. And so if you're a founder in a company and you sort of are willing to grind away and do, not just 10 cold calls, but 100 cold calls, if you're willing to, fix whatever bug is up and do, completely rehash the product and get it out there, like those are valuable things that drive the business along. Like the effort that you inputted will hopefully have some output. That's not always the case in VC. And it can actually lead to weird outcomes where, if you keep hitting up a founder and keep sort of stressing them out on random stuff, like it doesn't matter if you built $1 billion business before. Your advice is only as good as the relevance to actually this business that's being built. And so I think that so much of the credit or attribution and like the pain that you see, that's the root of it, is just like this misunderstanding of how VCs and startup founders like work together.
Yeah. Another amazing Eli-ism is the line between value add and value destroy is very thin. Like, value add is, of course, the thing that all VCs talk about, and founders debate whether it's like a real reason to choose one particular investor over another. But like you're saying, yeah, it very easily could turn into value destroy if you're giving bad advice, if you're wasting the founder's time, if you're doing things that aren't aligned with the ultimate success of the company.
Totally the case. And the issue is that you can have advice that feels uncomfortable and that makes you mad that's still helpful.
Right.
That absolutely exists.
Yeah, totally.
But it's also the case that you can have advice that makes you mad, that makes you uncomfortable, and is totally not helpful. And so figuring that out is very difficult as a founder.
Okay, so let's zoom in. So maybe let's talk about Phaidra. Phaidra was actually our first investment ever at Character, and your role as more of a focused financially focused investor versus Jake and I, who help with kind of product and marketing and strategy sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I actually love the way you framed that, because when I was thinking about Phaidra, it was not actually the financial stuff that got me excited about it.
Yeah.
And I think that very rarely actually that's like the tipping point or the decision point for like the interest in a company. But I can tell you exactly why with Phaidra I was pumped. Two things. The first was that I'd spent the past several years basically being mystified that IBM Watson was like a thing, because it wasn't a thing. It was just like a marketing amalgamation of AI. And I always thought that was like just like a terrible thing that, you just buy a bunch of companies and call them Watson. In contrast, though, I'd been following DeepMind, pretty closely, and was really impressed, even though I could not claim to understand all of the work that they were doing. I was really impressed with the methodology that they were using. And I'd been a really big Go player, and it turned out that the CTO, Phaidra, at Phaidra had worked on the AlphaGo project, and I'd actually played the bot that they were training in.
Oh,
it was
no
called
way.
KGS. Yeah. I'd played the bot, and this was before it was like listed as a bot. And it was like, oh my God, why is this pro playing me? But of course, like it didn't matter because it was just a bot. Like, but at the time, no one knew.
Yeah.
But so I had been really pumped about, one, the approach that Phaidra was taking using real technology that they had, built at DeepMind. That just intuitively was like, whoa, this team has something actually special. And it's a very different thing than coming from like, if the team had been at Watson and they were like, well, we're part of a roll-up strategy where we're going to just rebrand a bunch of like companies as Watson, like totally different approach. And the second thing was that I had invested in a number of manufacturing related tech companies at my old firm, where that was Midwest was our focus for our venture investing. And so sort of the problems and the idea totally captivated me. So those were the two things that got me excited. It was like seeing where it worked in the past with other manufacturing related ish tech plays, and then the team.
Yeah. Okay. And so I had met Phaidra because of somebody that Jake and I worked with at GV. And then I think I had a call with them, and then I connected them with you. We do this kind of weird thing where like we meet with founders individually and we fill out our scorecard. We use a scorecard. So like we went through that process, and then what happened next? Like walk us through like the next couple of steps.
And we should explain at some point what Phaidra is for people, like, or what you guys heard at this point. What did you, what was this company all about? What was the pitch?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to rely on my Fathom note taker, which is Jay-Z, to get this exactly right. But as I recall, it was autonomous AI for industrial facilities. That's still how I would phrase it. Yeah. I don't think they've changed dramatically, but that's roughly like as I understood it at the outset. Is that your recollection as well, Jay-Z?
Yeah, I think that is basically how they were describing it at the time, and that is basically still what it is. So Phaidra, like Eli said, was founded by the DeepMind team that had worked on AlphaGo. They had put AI in charge of Google data centers and saved a whole bunch of energy that was had been used to cool Google data centers. And then they got to work building this AI agent that can optimize all kinds of different industrial facilities. So, you think about a big factory, it has a lot of sensors and automated equipment that turns things on and off and adjusts valves and, sort of tweaks the settings to help that plant run efficiently. Phaidra basically puts AI in charge of that. A really, really smart, but also a really responsible AI that's not going to, cause any problems at the factory. It's not going to break any equipment. It's not going to cause any issues with whatever that facility is making. But it optimizes it for reduced energy, for stability, sort of as this autopilot that frees up the team, the engineers who are running that plant day to day, to think kind of longer term, think bigger picture about making sure the equipment is up to date, making sure that everything is working right, rather than having to be in the control room, glued to the gauges, sort of monitoring what's going on.
And we're not talking about like marginal improvements in these things. Like Google with the data centers, they saved 40% on the electricity. Yeah, amazing. Wild. Yeah. These are already very carefully designed data centers. If you've ever seen the photos of the multicolored pipes, and like they designed them to be as efficient as possible, and they save 40% on top of that. It's wild. So there's a lot of potential in their track record. So anyway, sorry for that tangent, but just for our listeners. So you guys are doing this scorecard thing. And I also want to kind of linger on this for a minute, because this is something I think the two of you, the three of us, take for granted, that it makes sense to evaluate a company and then score it individually rather than talking a whole lot about it together first. Why do that?
Sprinty, isn't it? Just hearing you say it. So sprinty. We're going to work alone before we work together, in a way, or work together alone. Although I think this was something that I had partially experienced in my last firm. We actually had scorecards as well, and I keep meaning to dig it out. But until I met Jay-Z and heard about the work that you guys had done, previously at GV, trying to figure out how to standardize these, I didn't realize the power of them, which is to enable us to normalize sort of our ratings, our opinions, and properly frame them in all of the other companies that we've seen. And so rather than just having an argument about every single company, or a discussion about every single company, we're trying to say like, well, this CEO is so cool. Like, did you see like where they went to school, and like they talked so well, like, and I think it's going to be amazing. The other person being like, well, maybe that could be the case, I guess. We're trying to say, what are the characteristics that we think makes for a successful pre-seed or seed company? And let's assign a ranking to that. Let's say it's 0, unacceptable, to 1, to 2, to 3, outstanding. And if we do that, and if we independently come up with these scores, over time, we have the chance to both look at companies as they grow. So if we met with, Phaidra a bunch of times, we would have been able to see, are we trending up or trending down? And then again, this notion that, well, as a venture firm, we're trying to figure out where can we sort of put the weights with our pool of money. Like, it becomes clearer when this company scores super highly against the universe of companies that you've seen, that you should put the weights. Of course, we didn't know any of this with Phaidra because it was our first investment. So we had a very, very limited database.
If we zoom forward from there, we've made the investment. The company, of course, like you said, they're doing all the work. They're doing the really hard work of building this product, of building this company, hiring a team. What are some of the ways that you have worked with Phaidra, that we all have worked together with the company?
We should be clear. Phaidra wanted to work with us for a specific reason. It wasn't because they liked all of us, which I think they did. But they wanted to work with us because they had a big problem with trying to think through how to build a product that would be trusted and really usable for their customers who are not tech forward people in and of themselves. So, a plant manager at any given random plant is probably not the most up to speed on AI. And so the core reason they wanted to accept our money to work with them was because of Sprint. And so that's the first way that the three of us had a chance to work together in a sprint. And
one of the things that's really powerful about a sprint like that, and we've had a few of those over the years, whether it involves, in this case, people who are really cautious about making changes to how they run an industrial plant, as well they should be. They don't want to screw it up. The stakes are high. Or folks who are in healthcare and they really are reluctant to change how they operate because the stakes are high. They don't want to screw it up, rightly so. And if you sprint at those problems, you're able to get focused attention from those folks who understand why we should be reluctant to make changes. And I think they raise the bar of the solutions that the engineers on the team, the people who are trying to disrupt the way things are done, I think they raise the bar of like, okay, how do we ensure that this is really trustworthy? That's a really healthy thing to try to solve in that way. And I think it's where a lot of startups will trip up in trying to disrupt something, is not being able to deeply work together on what's both a powerful change, and also meaningfully addresses these reasonable requests for trust.
It's such a good one. And it's actually, it's almost like a hack for us to be able to invest in more capital intensive businesses with greater certainty. Because if you think about like those types of really high trust building companies, usually what they require is raising these gigantic rounds to see like, well, is this the path that we're working on? Is it going to work? And they have to sort of burn through that money. They have to get to an MVP, et cetera. But with this way of working with startups, even if we're in these really sort of uncertain fields, we can get them to those high trust points with difficult to integrate with customers, or at least help them get clarity on it faster. And there's nothing better than being able to say like, oh, this isn't working. We should do this. We're not going to burn $5 million in 8 months of the company's life trying to do it. So that's a cool point, I think.
In addition to we did a couple of design sprints with Phaidra, and you brought a very important and different perspective that otherwise wasn't represented on the team. Like, you were the only investor in those sprints. You're also on the board, or I guess technically you're a board observer for Phaidra. And one thing that has been really cool for me to see is that you're on a texting basis, a phone call basis with the CEO, with Jim. And just as a quick aside, if you haven't already, anybody listening, there's an amazing interview with Jim Gao, the CEO of Phaidra, on Sequoia's Training Data podcast, which we will link, that you should definitely listen to. But can you tell us about like, what are some of the things that, like, I don't know, I'm sorry to like drill on this point, but I just feel like like nobody sees this like one-on-one interaction that happens between like a CEO of a company and an investor. Like, these things do not show up on Twitter. They do not show up on LinkedIn. Like, what are some of the ways in which you like help Jim, you act as a sounding board for Jim as he's kind of figuring out how to build Phaidra?
Yeah, I think that, so again, all companies, and like the reason I'm on a board is because it's a corporation, and there's responsibilities to the shareholders to have a fiduciary duty and to really do things under that formula in the correct way as you're building a company. So it's not just a nonprofit, it's not just a project. There's responsibilities, and I think that a good board participant, it's not the same level of responsibility as a full member, but even as an observer, you're thinking about those sort of requirements and then how to serve the overall mission of the shareholders, not just the sort of idea in and of itself. And so I think that some of those discussions you end up having are about super normal stuff. How should we hire for next year? Does the budget look sensible? And then there's so many things that are also more people-based is at the core. And so getting back to that value add, value destroyed line, that came up most frequently in my experience at board meetings, because you have a bunch of personalities. Usually personalities are the ones who become VCs. And you also have personalities as founders. I mean, you're not really going to be like a milquetoast person and start a company, right? So there's just sort of like egos, there's big personalities all around. So I found that the human factors discussions about how to constructively manage those sort of dual obligations of, one, doing correct and right for your shareholders, and then two, doing correct and right for your vision for the mission of the company, those can actually end up in like, not in tension, but they can feel like difficult if you haven't had a bunch of reps. And so I think the best relationships that I've had, not just with Jim or other CEOs, are where there's a base level of trust that's been established that, hey, I don't know everything. I'm not a walking encyclopedia, but I've seen this story play out a few times, and here's like the steps that you might want to avoid. Like, basically, here's some failure modes that I've seen specifically related to like human factor stuff.
Yeah.
And here's what we should try to avoid.
Yeah. And it just seems like as a CEO, especially if you're a first time founder, but even if you're not, it must be so nice to have you, like, saved in your favorites in your phone, to be able to be like, hey, I have a quick question, or I'm kind of stuck on this. Like, can you give me any advice? Can you like jump on the phone with me real quick? Because as the way you're describing like the board, it just like, it seems so formal. It's so intimidating in ways. There's this kind of responsibility of, thinking about this whole group of people who don't work for the company. They're not in that room. And so it's almost like a pressure release valve of, for the CEO to be able to like, break out of that formalized structure and just be like, hey, I'm feeling stuck. Like, can you help me out a little bit here?
And I think that one of the ways that, for the three of us, being founders of your own firm, it just changes your perspective on how that interaction, like the importance of that interaction. And so again, like in my story, probably would have been better if I just like graduated, went to an Ivy, did my 2 years in investment banking, went back to like Stanford or Harvard Business School, got really good grades, went back into consulting or like something for a year, and then did my own startup, or like.
It sounds so boring though.
Yeah, it does sound boring, but like that's probably would have been better. But I don't know that I would have like that same level of like fire and sort of like dedication. Like this is on us. This is on me. This is on, we have a responsibility to try to make this work. And that's a really different mindset shift. And so I hope that translates into how all of us, engage with our founders. And I think it shows up.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
You, Eli, when you were working at the venture firm, straight during college and straight out of college, that was a small firm, right? That was
very
how many
small.
folks?
I think the max we had was 12. And I'd started out as an analyst, and then I was a junior partner, and then I became a general partner, so a regular partner in our third fund, which was a $50 million entity that was primarily investing in B2B SaaS companies at that point, but only in the Midwest.
Okay. And so you, at that size, and certainly at our size, where it's just us, that means you're doing a lot more of everything than you might be doing at a larger firm. At a larger firm, you might have a bit more of an opportunity to specialize, or to say, hey, this part of this, I'm going to pass this off to someone else, or just kind of stay in my lane. And you chose that again when you chose to co-found Character with us. And in fact, you chose to go even smaller. Was that something that factored in, of all the things that you could have done at that point?
Yeah.
That's not the easy road to take. Why small?
I had a better answer for it. I wish I would have thought about it in that framing, Jake, because I wonder what my decision would have been. I got fired up about Character because I had met a ton of founders at that point. I mean, I don't know, thousands upon thousands. And when I met Jay-Z, I was like, this is a person I have to work with. that was part of the reason. It was like, it was less like planned, and it was more serendipitous. But then I also felt like, understanding Sprint, seeing who he was as, potential co-founder, I was like, holy crap. Like, Spidey sense is going, that intuition is like firing on all cylinders,
conviction punch.
The conviction punch totally makes sense. Truly.
Yeah.
And the second was, as we started to talk, some of the things that I've been thinking about, particularly around wanting to invest in companies all over the country, and explicitly being grounded on like, how can we work with the most impactful, like biggest potential companies to make real changes? and have really, really amazing returns. Like that seemed to resonate with what Jay-Z was thinking about too, or became excited about. And so that just, those two factors more than sort of like an analysis of like, should I be big or small? Like sort of like tipped me over into this camp.
Okay. Cool.
Eli, thanks for opening up. Thanks for sharing like some of the inner thoughts and workings of how you got into venture and how you work with founders. And for what it's worth, I felt the same way after meeting with you. I remember talking to my wife, Michelle, and being like, there's something really special about this guy. And like, this feels like one of those moments in life where you're supposed to jump. So really, really glad it worked out. But before we all get super embarrassed, I think we should, there's one other thing I want to talk about. It's going to hopefully be a little bit easier and less taxing for you, Eli, but I want to talk about this MrBeast memo.
This is a big left turn, no signal, but I think there are connections.
So I was on Hacker News, and the top link on Hacker News was leaked memo or something, how to succeed in MrBeast production. And I was hooked. I was like, what on earth is this? For many reasons, including the fact that when I worked at YouTube, I helped to design the YouTube channels platform. And so I've just always been really curious about what kinds of channels are people building on YouTube? Like with this set of tools that I helped to create, what are people doing with it? MrBeast, if you don't know, is I think the most successful YouTuber. And so
not only that, MrBeast is probably one of the most successful startup CEOs, startup founders, right? You probably wouldn't think of him in that way mostly, but that's exactly what it is. Yeah. It's like an empire. And this is a glimpse inside.
Yeah. And so anyway, so this doc is written for somebody who is joining MrBeast production team, the people who make the videos. And it's just a whole bunch of advice. It's sort of it's a cross between like an employee handbook and sort of what I wish I knew when I was in, your shoes, just starting out, kind of how to be successful. So
I just say I was so skeptical about this when you sent it over. Like I was so skeptical. I was just like, this is bogus. And then I read it and I came away feeling like, holy crap, this is like Sun Tzu. This is like the art of war. And the reason is because it tells you like, here's what you have to do. Here are the steps. Like you have to go, here's how you would go into battle to be successful with MrBeast. But I think that's cool. I think the actionability and the practicality of it as a document, like that's what's stood out to me, is just being like, whoa, here's how you do it.
Totally. So Jake, what were some of the things that stood out to you? Like what are some of the biggest lessons you think from this document?
Well, I've read through this. I'm just going to kind of go from top to bottom. I read it on my iPad. I took notes as I went, drawing on the document. So you can experience that with me. There's a little bit of an intro, and you get the feeling right off the bat that Jimmy, MrBeast, is going to give you almost a stream of consciousness that this is not a very polished doc, that it's off the top of his head, and that it comes from a place, I think, of pain. That the pain is this company's growing too fast. They don't have enough time to spend with new people who are joining, but their role is really critical to our success. And I have this very clear picture of what I need them to do, how I need them to operate. And I just can't share that with everybody. So he's making this document because he's got to solve that pain. And that's interesting. A lot of the times when you see a document, when you see, here's our company values, or here's how we play, if you see it out in the public, it's very polished and it's got all of the interesting angles smoothed away. And if you have a large organization and they're making this, and even if it's not out in the public, even if it's just for their own large organization and they've got a team of people working on it, and maybe they consult with an executive or something, but all of it's just turned into oatmeal, and there's nothing good here. But this is a survival guide. And I always think if you can find a survival guide for something that's either a startup or hyper growth, there's interesting stuff there. There's good stuff there. So as we scroll down here, Here's one of the parts though that I was like, oh, wow, this is great. It says, what is your goal here? And I wrote number 1 by this because I thought this is principle number 1. There are a few things in here. They're not necessarily in order. They're not all together, but there are a few things in here that are these key principles about how MrBeast operates, how the company operates. And this is one of them. What's your goal here? Your goal is to make the best YouTube videos possible. YouTube is all in caps. And then it says, it's not to make the best produced videos. It's not to make the funniest videos, not to make the best looking videos, not the highest quality videos. It's to make the best, again, all caps, YouTube videos.
Yeah.
What did John or Eli, what did you guys think when you saw this paragraph?
Well, to me, it reminded me of like some of the work that we try to do in sprints with founders of like, what matters now? Like what uniquely matters to this company right now? Essential, like almost linchpin of like, if we don't make the best YouTube videos, it doesn't matter what else we're doing here, because that's how we win. That's how we are evaluated. That's the playing field that we are competing on. So I just took it as this like very rare and bold focusing for the team, which I think every team should have. Every team should have a statement like this.
I love that it forces the reader to consider everything through the eyes of a beginner or through a new lens. It's asking you to think through a frame of how does it keep the viewer engaged? That's not the same as funny. That's not the same as best produced. That's different. And I did love the definition of an A player here. Mm-hmm. A players are obsessive, learn from mistakes, coachable, intelligent, don't make excuses, believe in YouTube. That's an interesting one. Like believe in YouTube. And he talks about this elsewhere. If you don't believe that YouTube is going to just grow and grow and become more and more important, you don't belong here. You need to be obsessed with that idea too. And I think the key word obsessive is really interesting and something that comes up again and again. Both literally, he says obsessive again and again, but also it's embodied in the stories and anecdotes that there's an obsessive nature to this, to just caring so much about this and never giving up on making the way that we do things better. You see that come up again and again. And I thought that was really kind of inspiring. So I'm going to skim down. And this one was really cool. You can see I've drawn little ziggy lines in the margin because I thought this was so cool. At the end of this long block of text, and he's describing, and it's funny. I mean, also that like, I highly recommend reading this just for like, it's funny, but in all caps, it says, this is why you must know the title and thumbnails of the videos you are making. How can you know how to start your video if you don't even know what expectations the viewers have of you?
Yeah.
And this notion that first, before we make the video, before we finish creating the thing, we have to first figure out what's the thumbnail. When someone's on YouTube, what's the thing that they see and is it going to draw them in? What's the title of the video? How is the title going to draw them in? And is the thumbnail going to draw them in? Because we then need to deliver on that promise, but we need to first find the right promise and then figure out how to deliver on the promise, not make a video and then try to figure out what was the promise of this? What's the clickbaitiest way we can do that? It's turning that on its head. The first thing is to define the way we're going to market this thing.
Yep.
And then we're going to figure out how to deliver on a compelling promise.
Well, this is something we often do. I was going to say always, but maybe not always. We often do with founders, and we sometimes get pushback on it because sometimes founders are like, well, we got to build the product first. Like, how do we know like what we're marketing if we don't build it first? And we like to make the point that if the message of it, the positioning of it, the value proposition doesn't click with customers, then it doesn't really matter. Like a great product that nobody clicks on and reads about and learns about, it's a tree that falls in the woods and nobody hears it. It just kind of doesn't really matter. There was a different part in the document where he says the creative process for every video starts with the title and thumbnail. These set the expectations for the viewer, and everything that follows needs to be defined with those in mind. Like this to me was just such a good lesson that I think doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're starting a software company, if you are, opening a cafe in your neighborhood, if you are starting a venture fund like we did, really will help yourself. You'll save time. You'll increase your probability of success if you start at the end, if you start with sort of the thing that people are going to see and evaluate before you get into all the weeds.
In our last episode, John, you recommended an episode of the Animal Spirits podcast where Seth Godin was interviewed.
Yeah.
And I listened to it and I jotted down a note of something he said that I think ties in here. He said, good sales is not a used car salesman or selling a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. A good salesperson creates the conditions to help a person to get what they want. And he says, marketing is not spam or commotion. Marketing is a larger version of sales. Marketing is how do we create conditions for people to find what they're looking for? And I just thought here, this notion of creating the conditions for people to find what they're looking for, that's kind of what they're trying to do. Like, they're trying to figure out, like, what are people looking for? How do we create the conditions to help them find it?
Yeah.
And then it's only then that you figure out, now how do we deliver on that promise? But first, we got to make sure there's product market fit. We've got to make sure that this thing is going to click, and we work backwards from there. Love it. It is so much the way we work in character labs, which we've talked about a bunch, and not to turn this into like, a self-promotional thing, but like, it is this thing we deeply believe where you've got to figure out the story, you've got to figure out whether it clicks with customers, and then make sure the product will deliver that promise. So as we scroll down here, now we're getting into an area where it's reminding me of our talk about lightning demos. We went in a previous episode into great detail on lightning demos. We showed some examples of lightning demos, and the notion with lightning demos, if you haven't yet heard that excellent episode, highly recommend it, of our podcast. The lightning demos episode, we talked about how lightning demos are patterns that exist, successful patterns. And if you use those successful patterns, you don't have to come up with a solution from scratch. You benefit from this armature that works, and then you do your unique offering on top of that armature, on top of that structure, and you can be pretty confident, gosh, that structure works pretty well. So he talks about a tactic called crazy progression. So he says, let's say we have a 10-minute video about a guy surviving for weeks in the woods. Instead of making the first 3 minutes of the video about his first day, then progressing from there like a logical filmmaker would, we cover multiple days in the first 3 minutes. So the viewer is now super invested in the story. And this is one of the patterns that he's going to introduce. If we go further down, we'll see the wow factor. That's like another pattern that he talks about. And he says, anytime we do something that no other creator can do, that separates us in their mind, it makes our videos more special to them, changes how they see us, and it does make them watch more videos and engage more with the brand. You can't track the wow factor, but I can describe it. You're like, oh my gosh, these are the only folks who could do it because they're audacious enough to take it on. They're technically skilled enough to pull it off. They have the money to do it, whatever. But it also becomes part of like their promise, the promise of the brand, the promise of the channel. If you come back and watch more videos, you'll get wowed again at some point.
Yeah.
And even though you might not see that on the replay chart,
right,
you'll give something special to the customer.
Yeah. And that's where the differentiation, what makes MrBeast unique, it connects through from the thumbnail, maybe the first time you ever see a MrBeast video, through your experience watching it, through the next time when you come back and you know what you're going to get. Like, it's all consistent. It's all connected on a through line. It's
really interesting because the idea that you're going to have a clickbaity headline and you're going to on YouTube and you're going to have some crazy thumbnail, that's everywhere, right? There's a lot of that around. With MrBeast videos, it's going to deliver really satisfyingly on the promise of the clickbait headline. And not infrequently, you're going to be like, what? Like, what? Like, even better than the headline. That happened in there?
That's the key, is most clickbait headlines, the content does not deliver on the headline, right? You feel let down. You feel like, oh, I got tricked. It was a bait and switch.
Burned. I'm stupid. I end up feeling bad. I click on something clickbait and I read it and I'm like, that didn't deliver. And I'm like,
fell for it again. How could I? MrBeast, it's the opposite. Not only did they do what they said they were going to do, but it was crazy, and it was wow in more ways than I expected.
It gives you a feeling of actual success as a person to watch something like that, because it's like, I was right to click on that.
Yeah.
I wasn't dumb. I wasn't just a waste of time. Like I experienced something sublime.
I'm so good at watching YouTube. I should be rewarded.
Yeah. But I mean, there really is something to that.
It's really funny. Yeah.
That's my weird take on it. Okay. So there are really just two more things that I want to highlight on the MrBeast document. One of them is here. And as I mentioned, the lightning demos idea, it's here on page 29, where it talks about formats. It says one way to boost retention on a video is to have a good format for the video to follow. And the wow factor is kind of a lightning demo. The crazy progression is kind of a lightning demo for how the beginning starts. I mean, they're lightning demos, but this one, it's really clear. It's really clearly talking about the structure for the video. If you follow this structure, good things will happen. One way to boost retention is to have a good format. So let's use our popular last to leave series as an example. So it's like the last one to leave the circle wins $100,000 as an example. But apparently they have like a series of these. Another example of a format is what I like to call stair stepping. So a good example of this is I bought the world's largest firework, and it goes from lighting a $1 firework, $10, $50, a $375 firework, a $1,000 firework, a $10,000 firework, a $40,000 firework, a $100,000 firework, and then the world record for like the most expensive firework. So that stair stepping. So now you can imagine, okay, I want to apply that. What's another way to stair step in the video and go from like a small thing, and then it just, you just keep wanting to see what's going to happen next. Another format would be the ones where I get chased, like a bounty hunter or the military, the FBI is chasing me. Then it's easy to imagine listening to these. It's like, yeah, that sounds really compelling. But it's so interesting to consciously have this notion of like, okay, we found a good format. We're going to reuse that. Now, he also talks about how he doesn't like to use the same format forever, even though he says the viewer may think they want a format forever, but they don't. They want new and fresh things. He says, I'm constantly ditching formats in exchange for new ones. This goes back to then the last thing I wanted to highlight that I really liked here. He says, what's the goal of our content? Now, based on what we saw earlier, it'd be easy to think the goal of the content is to make the best YouTube videos, to engage the customer, the viewer, for as long as possible, and to get them to reshare, those kinds of things. But that's not what the goal of the content is. He says the goal of the content is to excite me. The goal, and it's repeated. What is the goal of our content? To excite me. The goal of our content is to excite me. And this is so cool. He just want to do what makes me happy and ultimately the viewers happy. This channel is my baby and I've given up my life for it. I'm so emotionally connected to it that it's sad, LOL. But this is the one thing I will never compromise on. I have zero issues throwing away a multi-million-dollar video if I don't think it's up to my standards and is good for the audience. We must always be improving and innovating. The camera angles need to always get better. The pacing, the story, the jokes, the color, the lighting, the music, the props, the people, our framing, our ideas, literally everything must always be improving and innovating because that is what excites me. That's literally what I live for, to see these videos get better and better and ultimately make the viewers happy. And I thought that is so cool. Like that's just such a cool embodiment of earlier when he talks about being obsessive and when he gives these really prescriptive ideas for how things should be done. I love that it's about him remaining excited about it. And I think that's inspiring. I mean, I feel like that matches what I love about working with you guys. And it's, it may not be as catchy as making MrBeast videos, but it's like the same thing. And I dug that. So anyway, highly recommend the How to Succeed at MrBeast Production PDF.
What do you think about making this PDF available? I mean, this annotated, your annotated version. What do you think about making that available?
Yeah, if people want to take a look at it, you can definitely check out my scribbles and highlights and things on there. We can link to it in the show notes. And if you want a clean version without my notes on it, it's available, I think, pretty much everywhere.
At this point, the whole internet is talking about it. So cool. Well, anything else, guys? Should we wrap this up?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. We'll do it again sometime. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been episode number 6, I think, of Jake and Jay-Z. If you are listening in Spotify, you should follow us. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, you should subscribe there. If you're watching this on YouTube, you should click subscribe so that you get notified when a new episode is out. And if you want to get an email every week when the podcast releases, you can do that at jakeandjz.com. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
This is Jake and Jay-Z. This is Jake and Jay-Z.